The insult came like a spark in a dry forest, small, sharp, but capable of igniting everything in its path. On live television, with the polished confidence of a man who has learned that his words alone can shift headlines, Donald Trump leaned forward, smirked, and let the line drop. She's a low IQ individual. Everyone knows it. It was casual, unblinking, as if he had just remarked on the weather. But the weight of those words didn't stop at the camera lens, as they tore through the airwaves and detonated across the nation. By the next morning, America had already chosen sides. The clip wasn't just being replayed. It was multiplying, cut into memes, stamped into headlines, repeated by supporters with a laugh and by critics with a scowl. On social media, a low E key trended like a brand name, and everyone wanted to stake their claim in the conversation. But behind the noise, something deeper was happening. You see, most people only hear the words. They don't think about the strategy. Because insults at that level are rarely just insults. They're positioning. They're bait. Ooh. They're a test to see whether the target will flinch, react emotionally, and play into the trap. And if you've ever been in a real fight, political or otherwise, you know this truth. Your first response will define the battlefield. In Washington that night, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was not watching the interview live. She was buried in committee work, dry legislative language, complex amendments, and funding proposals meant to keep rural hospitals alive in towns the president couldn't even find on a map. Her phone lit up. At first, it was just one text, then 3, then dozens. By the time her chief of staff leaned in and whispered what had just happened, the insult was already spreading faster than wildfire. This was not her first time being attacked. Politics makes the skin thick. But this was different. This was a direct attempt to define her, not as an opponent, but as an idea. And the danger of an idea is that it can stick whether it's true or not. She didn't react. Not yet. Because Crockett understood something most people don't. When the other side swings first, they want you to hit back on their terms. The only way to win is to change the terms entirely. And that's exactly what she was about to do. By dawn, the clip had left the political bubble and entered the bloodstream of the culture. It was no longer just a talking point, it was a signal. Chirons blasted a Trump calls Crockett low IQ on live TV in bold red. Talk shows were booking emergency panels. Sprouted like weeds. #stand with Crockett, #low IQ logic, #triggered Crockett. Supporters of the president were sharing the quote like a trophy. Her supporters were turning it into a rallying cry. And the most dangerous thing about a moment like this, it stops being about truth. Stops being about truth. It becomes about perception. Jasmine Crockett knew perception was everything in politics. In fact, she knew that in the age of 24-hour outrage, you don't win by being right. You win by controlling the frame. And the frame was shifting fast. If she jumped in now, the story would be Crockett response to Trump. If she waited too long, it would become Crockett silenced by Trump. Both frames were traps, so she sat still, deliberately still. While the political world shouted, she said nothing. She didn't tweet. She didn't give a phone interview. She didn't leak a statement. Silence in moments like this is not weakness. It's pressure. It forces everyone to wait, to speculate, to lean forward in their chairs, wondering when the hit will come. The irony. While the pundits talked about her as though she were cornered, she was moving. Quietly. Methodically. Her communications director was tracking coverage, mapping the way the story was being spun in different markets. Her policy team was finalizing fresh statistics on rural hospital closures, numbers so stark they didn't just speak, they screamed. Her chief of staff was on the phone with local media in Texas, priming them to cover whatever came next. In Amarillo, a bakery owner recorded a short video, frosting a cake while saying, "If this is what low IQ looks like, I'll take it." A crow in Lubbock, a teacher wrote, "She's saving the only hospital in our county." These weren't paid endorsements. They were real voices, cutting through the noise with something no campaign consultant can fake. Authenticity. And Trump? He doubled down. That morning on conservative radio, he repeated the insult and tacked on a new jab. She doesn't understand basic economics. It was supposed to be a power move. But Crockett didn't see it as an attack. She saw it as an opening. He thought she'd fight over the insult. She was planning to make him fight over the truth. By mid-morning, her office felt less like a workplace and more like a command center. Aides darted in and out with printed articles, polls, and updates from reporters who were swarming the hallway outside. Camera crews were setting up near the elevators. Even a few international outlets had sent correspondents, smelling blood in the water. A Capitol security had tightened, but the press kept inching forward, waiting for the first crack in the silence. Jasmine sat at the head of a table in her private conference room, blinds drawn, coffee untouched. Around her sat the people she trusted most: Lionel, her razor-sharp chief of staff; Elise, her communications director with the memory of an archivist and the instincts of a street fighter; Mo, her senior policy advisor who treated numbers like weapons; and Terrence, her husband, who had been through enough campaigns to know the difference between political noise and political opportunity. They didn't waste time on small talk. Lionel opened with the lay of the land. The supporters are framing this as disrespect to your district, not just to you. That's good. It makes this about more than your feelings. But the White House is pushing the idea that you're overly sensitive, that you can't take criticism. They're booking him on more shows to repeat the line. Mo jumped in. It's bait. If you swing at the insult, you legitimize it. You legitimize it. If you ignore it completely, they'll brand you as weak. Silence followed, the kind where strategy is being built in real time. Elise finally said, we flip this. Tie it directly to the hospital funding bill. Use the insult as the doorway, but walk people into the real issue. Make him regret ever giving you the microphone. Terrence leaned forward, voice steady. You know what I think. You go live. No script, no teleprompter. Just talk to people like you do back home. They're expecting a politician's speech. Give them the truth instead. Give them the truth instead. Jasmine scribbled a few words on her notepad, but didn't respond right away. She looked up, meeting each set of eyes at the table. I'm not here to defend my intelligence. My record does that for me. What I am here to do is fight for my district. And right now, that fight is about keeping hospitals open in towns the president couldn't find on a map. If I respond, it'll be on my terms. The room tightened with focus. The plan was forming, but it wouldn't be safe, polite, or forgettable. It would be decisive. But Crockett wasn't just reading from a prepared script. She was conducting a live dissection of Trump's carefully cultivated image. Her words moved with the precision of a scalpel, stripping away the golden veneer to reveal the raw, unpolished truth beneath. She didn't raise her voice because she didn't have to. The power was in her control. Each pause was deliberate. Each glance at the camera carried the weight of someone who had seen too much to ever be silent again. Ew. Trump leaned back in his seat, the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth betraying the irritation he tried to hide. You could see it in his eyes. He wasn't used to being on defense, especially not from someone who refused to play by his rules. This wasn't the shouting matches he could spin into political theater. This was different. This was surgical, and everyone watching could feel it. She didn't accuse without proof. Instead, she pulled up screenshots, timestamped travel logs, even fragments of email correspondence. It was a drip feed, each new piece of information hitting harder than the last. She made it impossible to dismiss, impossible to wave away as a fake news. And as she built her case, she subtly shifted her focus from the man in front of her to the people watching at home. This, she said, gesturing to the evidence, isn't just about one man. It's about a system that lets someone like him operate in plain sight for decades. And if you think it stops here, if you think this is the full picture, you're already playing into his hands. The air felt heavier in the room. Journalists shifted in their seats, fingers flying over keyboards. Cameras zoomed tighter. Even Trump, who had spent years turning televised moments into opportunities, seemed to realize this was one he couldn't control. He glanced toward his aides, and for the first time, the confidence that usually wrapped around him like armor looked paper-thin. Crockett leaned forward, her tone dropping lower. Almost conversational now, but that only made it more dangerous. She wasn't just exposing facts. She was telling a story. Telling a story. A story where the audience wasn't just an observer, but a potential participant. And once you realize you're part of the plot, you can't look away. By the time she closed her folder, the trap was already set. The only question was whether Trump would take the bait or walk straight into it without realizing it was there. The fallout from that one meeting didn't just ripple, it detonated. By the next morning, political commentators were scrambling to interpret the subtext of every word Crockett had said. So was she implying that there was a hidden network inside the administration? Or was she pointing directly at the man himself, daring him to deny the evidence she'd just laid on the table? Cable news spun the clip on a constant loop, dissecting her tone, her pauses, her deliberate choice of phrasing. It wasn't just what she revealed. It was how she revealed it. It was how she revealed it. Each moment felt calculated, almost surgical, as if she had rehearsed for months to land those words with maximum impact. And maybe she had. Trump's team, usually quick to flood the airwaves, was suddenly fractured. Advisors argued over whether to launch an aggressive counterattack or remain silent and hope the story faded. But silence wasn't an option anymore. The genie was out of the bottle. Inside the West Wing, insiders whispered about hastily called closed-door meetings, frantic phone calls to allies in Congress, and late-night strategy sessions to contain the damage. One aide described the mood as like watching a dam crack in real time. Every hour, a little more water leaks through. Meanwhile, Crockett played a different game. She didn't give follow-up interviews. She didn't issue clarifications. Instead, she let the suspense do her work for her. She understood that in politics, the silence after the strike can be just as devastating as the strike itself. Online, her following exploded. Thousands of new voices joined the conversation, digging into the documents she'd made public, cross-referencing dates, and speculating on who else might be implicated. In a city addicted to narratives, Crockett had just handed the press a gold mine. Every outlet wanted a piece of the puzzle, and every new theory pulled more attention to her. It was the kind of move that either turns a politician into a legend, or paints a permanent target on their back. And Trump, for perhaps the first time in years, he wasn't dictating the conversation. He was reacting to it, and that, more than anything else, was what terrified his team. The sound in the room was changing now. Less chatter, more silence that clung like fog. Crockett didn't rush. She knew the value of pacing, of letting tension ferment before cracking it open. She placed her pen down, folded her hands, and asked the question that made the panel shift in their chairs. Mr. President, where were you on the night of October 17th? The date was deliberate, not random, not a vague time frame. A precise moment in history with witnesses, camera footage, and more than one paper trail. Trump leaned back slightly, narrowing his eyes, the corners of his mouth pulling into that practiced half-smile that said he thought he had control. But Crockett had already read him. She wasn't baiting him into talking. She was inviting him to lie. When he answered, it was with that trademark deflection, weaving into a story about a rally, about crowds, about the greatest people. But Crockett wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at the stack of files in front of her, flipping slowly, deliberately, until she stopped on one page and turned it toward the cameras. It was a signed flight manifest. The problem? It placed him hundreds of miles away from the city he just claimed to be in. The room inhaled sharply, not loudly but collectively. Even those in the back felt the shift. Reporters glanced at one another, hands twitching toward their phones. Trump caught the movement, and his tone sharpened. That's a fake document. Another witch hunt. But Crockett didn't respond. She just let the silence work, because silence has weight when the truth is already in the air. Behind the cameras, a few senior aides moved toward the exit. A subtle retreat, but not subtle enough. Everyone saw. Enough. Everyone saw. Everyone clocked it. And in that moment, the power dynamic in the room tipped. Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She just asked the next question like it was routine. Because the real damage wasn't in proving him wrong once. The real damage was showing the audience in real time that he could be caught at all. And once the illusion of untouchability cracks, it doesn't ever fully repair. When the clock hit 8:05 p.m., the summit hall was buzzing with chatter, reporters scribbling, donors smiling politely in their tableside conversations. Ivanka had already delivered her earlier blow, the one meant to rattle Jasmine Crockett in absentia. But in a calculated move, Crockett's team had managed to secure her a remote speaking slot in the exact same program. It wasn't supposed to be dramatic. It was supposed to be cordial. Yet the moment her face appeared on the massive LED screen behind the stage, the room froze. She didn't greet them with a smile. No, thank you for having me. No small talk. Instead, she began with a quiet sentence that cut through the air like glass on tile. You know, it's always interesting when people talk about leadership, right before proving they've never actually led anything. The audience leaned forward. Phones began recording. Ivanka's posture at the far corner of the stage stiffened like someone hearing their name whispered in a locked room. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her tone was the kind you only hear from someone who's both unshakable and unafraid. She spoke about policies, about measurable results, about years in courtrooms and committee rooms, fighting for people who didn't have lobbyists or billionaire friends. But then, almost casually, she shifted gears. And if the only weapon you have is performance, then every time the curtain falls, the truth catches up. The applause started slow, just a ripple in the back of the room. But it grew. Cameras zoomed in on Ivanka's face, and for the first time that evening, she wasn't in control of the frame. But Crockett wasn't done. She held up a folder, thin but deliberate, and tapped it against her desk. These are the numbers from the communities you claim to support. Mrs. Trump. Not the photo ops, the actual data. And they tell a very different story. You could hear someone in the front row mutter, "Oh, damn." The moderator shifted uncomfortably, unsure if they were witnessing a planned debate or an ambush in real time. This wasn't the fiery clapback people expected from Jasmine Crockett. This was surgical, precise, the kind of blow you don't recover from mid-event. And as the screen faded to black, all that remained was a room full of silence and the creeping awareness that the night's narrative had just changed hands. The footage wasn't grainy. It wasn't distant. It was crisp, close-up, and undeniable. The camera had been placed just behind a decorative pillar, almost as if it had been positioned there deliberately. The microphone picked up every syllable, every whisper, every slip, and there, in high definition, stood Ivanka Trump, leaning toward a man whose name had not yet been mentioned publicly in connection with her family's finances. Jasmine paused the video at the exact frame, where Ivanka's lips moved to form the words, "He's in, but it has to stay clean." She let the still image hang in the air for a full 3 seconds before pressing play again. The man's voice came next, soft, nervous. "If it leaks, we're done." His accent was unmistakable. His name had appeared only in niche investigative blogs, never in mainstream headlines. But to those who knew, it was a name that carried shadows of shell companies, luxury properties, and hidden ledgers. The reporters in the room were frantically typing, some not even bothering to look up. Jasmine let the clip run its course, then stopped it on a final frame. A handshake, subtle but firm. "This," she said, tapping the podium, "is why the public never hears the full truth. Because when power and money intertwine, the story is buried before it ever reaches daylight. And if you think this is just politics, you're not paying attention." The reaction was immediate. One network cut its live feed without explanation. Another kept the camera rolling but muted the audio, scrambling to issue a disclaimer. Social media, however, had already clipped and shared it in real time. Within minutes, the clip was trending across platforms with captions like she just ended them, and the handshake that could ruin everything. Ivanka's team released a short statement minutes later, calling the footage misleading and out of context, but offered no clarification. The man in the video, previously invisible to the general public, deleted his social media accounts within the hour. And that's when Jasmine leaned forward, resting both hands on the podium, her voice dipping into a lower, almost conspiratorial tone. "Ask yourself," she said, "if this was truly harmless, why would they try so hard to make sure you never saw it?" In that moment, it wasn't just about a video. It was about control, and Jasmine had just cracked the first piece of the armor. By the time the evening sun had dipped below the Dallas skyline, the conversation had already shifted from political talking points to whispers of a personal nature. Crockett, now in her car, sat silently with her phone still in hand, scrolling through the tidal wave of reactions. There was a sense in her eyes, part satisfaction, part resolve. She had struck a nerve, but she also knew what came next. The machine would retaliate. Every major outlet, every political commentator, and every online provocateur would have their say. The evidence as she displayed was not just a prop. It was a detonator, and that explosion was still rippling outward. Meanwhile, inside a gilded suite at the Ritz, Ivanka sat across from 2 advisors, the city lights flickering through the tall glass windows. Her phone buzzed nonstop, each alert more troubling than the last. Articles, tweets, and video clips, many clipped at the exact moment Crockett revealed the name, were flooding every corner of the internet. Some headlines painted her as the victim of a vicious ambush. Others hinted at a buried truth she could not escape. The more she scrolled, the more she realized the story was slipping from her control. In a single televised moment, Crockett had reframed the narrative, and whether it was entirely accurate didn't matter anymore. Perception was power, and Crockett now held it. The city buzzed with the energy of a political knife fight that had gone far deeper than anyone expected. And as both women prepared for the next move, the quiet understanding lingered. This wasn't over. It was just entering its most dangerous phase. The cameras were still rolling, but the room felt like it had slipped into another dimension. One where the usual rules of political theater no longer apply. Jasmine Crockett didn't just finish her rebuttal. She dismantled every lingering defense, every possible spin, and every narrative that the opposing camp might try to cling to. Her closing wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. She simply leaned forward, her voice steady, and delivered one last truth, one so undeniable that it rang in the ears of everyone present like the final toll of a cathedral bell. The crowd didn't erupt immediately. It was as if they were collectively trying to process what they had just witnessed. Then, a ripple, small at first, began to spread. People whispered, glanced around, checked their phones, and then the dam broke. Applause, shouts, reporters rushing to the exits to be the first to publish. Social media lit up in real time, hashtags forming like storm clouds before a downpour. Even those who opposed her politically had to admit, privately if not publicly, that something rare had just happened. Trump, however, sat frozen. For perhaps the first time in his career, the counterattack didn't come. No off-the-cuff insult, no rallying cry, no smirk, just a stillness, calculating, maybe even concerned. He glanced at his aides, who were already fielding a flood of messages from panicked allies and furious donors. Somewhere deep down, he understood that this wasn't just a bad headline. This was a shift in momentum, a moment that could define the months ahead. Outside, the press was in a frenzy. Crockett emerged not as the underdog, but as the architect of a turning point. Every camera caught her walking out of that chamber, like she owned the ground beneath her feet. Her phone buzzed with messages, colleagues offering praise, constituents cheering her on, and unexpected figures from across the aisle quietly acknowledging her skill. By the end of the night, clips of her dismantling Trump had amassed millions of views. Analysts broke down her strategy frame by frame, calling it a masterclass in political combat. But for Crockett, it wasn't about the headlines. It was about proving that truth delivered with precision and courage could still cut through the noise. And as America debated the fallout, one fact became impossible to deny. This was more than a clash between two political figures. It was the moment the entire game changed.